Hayek prophesied that Bitcoin would happen.
I don't believe that we shall ever have a good money again.
Unless by some sly roundabout way we find a way to introduce something they cannot stop.
And that's exactly what Bitcoin is.
So do you think John Nash figured out that? Basically, it's like he had to be this Satoshi Nakamoto character and disappear?
Yeah, I firmly believe Nash and Nakamoto are the same person.
That's why I think a lot of people think it wasn't one person. They think it was a coordinated effort amongst some group of people.
If it was a group of people, you can't keep a secret.
Right.
He was using prime numbers in the parameters within the elliptical curve cryptography to make it even stronger. So, I mean, that is a Nash signature. Precisely the same thing that Satoshi Nakamoto did.
Oh, so Satoshi did do that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And that's why AI is not going to break this. I mean, you have cryptography within cryptography.
Your thesis would be then that Satoshi Nakamoto became his secret identity and his secret world of building this big bang that is Bitcoin.
And that maybe in the future we'll look back on Satoshi Nakamoto as being the Prince of Peace, if we see Bitcoin as being a major milestone in human history.
I have been making progress in the other sense. I haven't completed so much. I have a paper published on ideal money, which I hope to follow up that with another paper extending the ideas. And I really feel I've discovered well, it's hard to describe it, but there has been a deterioration in the quality of money in many areas, and it brings up questions.
We're going to be talking about John Nash and Satoshi Nakamoto, and to the extent that Satoshi Nakamoto may have been influenced by the work of John Nash. Now, who is John Nash? We should probably intro him a little bit to start. People may have heard of the Nash Equilibrium, which is a concept in game theory, but people are more likely to have seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, which is about John Nash. So where, with that just very brief intro to who John Nash is, where should we begin exploring the potential influence that John Nash had on the work of Satoshi Nakamoto?
I think we can approach the connections, the concepts that tie Nash and Nakamoto together. And, you know, there's been people that are interested in this topic before I showed up on the scene. And what I did is I wrote about 18, which is the body of the book. And it's really a biography about Nash. And where it's different than A Beautiful Mind is really about a focus on his genius, his 25-year illness, and his recovery. And with an emphasis on his illness, I'm primarily interested in his accomplishments.
So when you say the 18, you're talking about these attributes that they both share.
Yes.
That both John Nash and
Very
Satoshi
strong connections.
Nakamoto share. And so the first one you have listed here is asymptotically ideal money and block reward halvings.
Yeah.
Let's break that down for people that may not understand what that means.
Asymptotically asymptotic is a mathematical concept. And when you're doing calculus, I'm a mechanical engineer. I work in aerospace. So to me, it's just normal vocabulary.
Yeah.
But what it is when you have a curve that is being cut in half every 4 years, it's approaching zero. So
Right.
you can see it's asymptotically approaching zero. Another way to think of this is, say you had 21 million grains of sand and you took half the sand away, and then you come back and you take another half and you keep on doing that. Well, eventually you're going to approach zero. You're never going to get there.
Right.
So imagine in 140 years, why do we go to zero? Because Satoshi Nakamoto clips the tail in the white paper. He shows how he does that mathematically. But the halving, and let's call it the block reward, it's going to go to zero. And asymptotically ideal money is something that John Nash talked about. Now, keep in mind, John Nash, after his recovery in 1983, he eventually published a paper called Ideal Money, which I would say is a revolutionary approach where you have a political agreement that we're going to stick to this index and have an honest ledger. But after he published that, he immediately started talking about asymptotically ideal money from 2002 to the rest of his life, to the rest of his life, which was 2015. And asymptotically ideal money, that is Bitcoin. It's not a revolutionary, it's an evolutionary, the sly roundabout way of getting back to an honest ledger.
So yeah, the asymptote or asymptotically ideal money, to asymptotically approach zero, as you described, is the pile of grains of sand. You take away half and you keep repeating the process until you're down to basically 2 grains of sand. You take away 1, and then you actually need to start dividing the grain of sand. Right? And so it's an infinite approach to zero, but it never actually touches zero. That's basically what an asymptote is.
Exactly.
And so Satoshi has built that into the Bitcoin, what would we call this? Instead of the quantitative easing that central banks engage in, there's a quantitative tightening built into Bitcoin that it issues less and less over time. Every 4 years, it cuts in half, basically. That process would continue out into infinity. However, in the year 2140, Satoshi clipped the tail, as you said. So
Makes it simple.
It goes to actual zero. There's no more Bitcoin mined after 2140.
That's right. So debasement and inflation in terms of Bitcoin is going to zero.
Right. And to give people an idea of how aggressive that is, I think by the year 2034, 99% of all the Bitcoin will have been mined. So between the years 2034 and 2140, which is 106 years, all of that mining activity will be basically mining the last 1% of the Bitcoin supply.
Yeah.
So this is a game that rewards early entrants disproportionate to later entrants.
Yeah.
Which is part of the game theory of Bitcoin, right? It's like the first movers get the advantage, basically. So your incentive is to move as quickly as possible to get some of this in case it catches on, as Satoshi once said.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so can we say a little bit more about what did John Nash say in his paper about asymptotically ideal money? Like, is this something that paralleled the design of Bitcoin?
What's interesting about that is he wrote the paper and he published it, only him.
Yeah.
He used the plural. But he would always talk about asymptotically ideal money when he was doing the rounds, and he was traveling the world at this time. I mean, he was at Princeton University. He was a professor, having tea at 4:00 in the afternoon, living the good life, and also traveling to present. And here he would talk about ideal money, but that was the publication. But he would talk about asymptotically ideal money.
So what in the publication though, like what was he writing? Was he describing Bitcoin? What was asymptotically?
Well, if you go over his writings, you'll find that John Nash wasn't a good writer. He was a genius mathematician. Okay. He was a very good programmer. But as far as his ability to write and really present in a way that is concise and precise, I would say he just wasn't there. And by the way, Satoshi Nakamoto admitted that he was a good programmer, a great programmer, but not a good writer. So if you look through his writings, it was always often titled asymptotically ideal money, and then he would talk about savings, and then he would do asymptotically ideal money, and then he would talk about another topic. And so he was writing, but it wasn't where a lot of these writings are located now. They're on the archive at Princeton, and that's where my footnotes are taking the links to those original writings.
Got it. But what you said are...
But they were lectures.
But
they were his writings, so we can deduce this is what he was talking about during his lectures.
Got it. And earlier you said he had made the suggestion that we had a global political agreement to agree to index to this.
Yeah, a lot of people said, how are you going to get the world to agree to, basically one currency? And he was positive. He was optimistic about that. But in reality, in 2002, he gave up on that. I mean, he made some statements where he believed he transitioned to politics is ineffectual. And that's where I think he went dark, and he started to live his secret world. And really his fundamental, if everyone thinks of his secret world as kind of this Beautiful Mind movie that won Best Picture, as being this, he had schizophrenia, he was paranoid. But I interpret his secret world as his long felt need for transitioning the Nash equilibrium into something what he called the immortal equilibrium.
What is the immortal equilibrium?
Bitcoin.
And what? So all right, let's double click on that. So a Nash equilibrium is something like, I don't know if I'm describing this correctly, the strategy that inherently antagonistic actors will adopt and when they can't trust one another, basically.
Exactly.
Right. So if you're playing, what's a game here? Like blackjack, for instance, right? That you're playing against other players. There's actually a book on blackjack, right? Like there's a strategy you should follow depending on what the cards say. So there's sort of a Nash equilibrium that can even be codified.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more murky in games like poker, chess, like there's not a defined strategy there's not a defined best move in every situation, whereas blackjack's a little more black or white. What is it? So what is an immortal version of that? Like
digital transformation of what he observed and discovered in 1950 in his PhD paper, his dissertation, the same that he won a Nobel Prize for later on after he recovered from his 25-year illness. But you know what? I think we're going to get into that when we get into his biography.
Okay.
I think we should just parking lot that and really just go down to the next one. This gradually phased, it's another Nash-Nakamoto connection. And this is something that Nash talked about, but also Satoshi Nakamoto talked about it. Remember, the quotes are the most important thing in this book. And if I go to gradually phased, John Nash in 2010 talks about it. Gradually, he says, ideal money, while some sort of typical 20th century money would be gradually phased out. So he talked about gradually, and we know that Satoshi Nakamoto was into that too. Remember when WikiLeaks was happening and they wanted to, just go forward with this. Let me bring up the quote on that. He's some guy named Robert Horning said, basically, bring it on. Let's encourage WikiLeaks to use Bitcoin, and I'm willing to face any risk or fallout from that act. Well, Satoshi responds, and he responds in 2010. Satoshi Nakamoto on Bitcoin Talk Forum says, no, don't bring it on. The project needs to grow gradually so the software can be strengthened along the way. So here are two voices that are happening. One Nakamoto, one Nash, and same year. Two different names.
And so Satoshi was advocating for not bring it on the protocol, take the gradual approach. What was Nash saying that paralleled that?
Nash was saying, I'll go back to that quote. Okay, John Nash, 2010, coming from Ideal Money and Asymptotically Ideal Money. And he's saying, I'm going to somehow a scheme that would gradually phase in a version of ideal money, while some sort of typical 20th century money, meaning fiat, would be gradually phased out.
Got it. Okay. So that is a pretty interesting parallel.
Strong connection
between them. Okay. The third one on your list is central bank bailouts and grand pardoners.
Well, we all know about central bank bailouts because that's part of Genesis block. Everyone knows about that. And that was running against the grain of most economists. Most economists at that time, they were the Keynesians.
Yeah.
And Nixon said in 1971, we're all Keynesians now.
Yeah.
That was mainstream thinking in 2009 when the Genesis block was created. And so who else is part of that minority class that was against these bailouts? Well, if we look at some of Nash's writings, he was very much part of that. So let me just find a quick quote. Okay, in 2002, John Nash, Ideal Money. He talks, and this standard as a basis for the standardization of the value of the international money unit would remove where it would be used the political roles of the grand partners.
The grand partners being
people who do bailouts.
Interesting.
And that's back from 2002 when he was doing the ideal money.
Wow. So then you're thinking that he, I mean, this, is this, so John Nash was starting to play another game in a way that he was, I guess he identified a problem, which is, central banking, the corruption of money, et cetera.
Let's go way back. Remember, he only had one international economics course at Carnegie Mellon before he showed up at Princeton.
Okay.
One economics course, and he won a Nobel Prize in economics.
Huh.
And that economics course was talking about the international problems. And it was taught by an Austrian economics professor. I haven't yet found the name of that person, but in a video, John Nash talks about the Austrian economics professor at Carnegie Mellon that he had a great reverence for.
Wow. So this guy takes
wow.
one Austrian economics course and then he wins a Nobel Prize in economics and then also has influenced and or invented Bitcoin. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. They're both mathematicians, Satoshi Nakamoto and
Yeah, clearly
John Nash.
John Nash was a polymath. You know, he really got into it starting at 14. His father was an electrical engineer, and that's when he started reading Men of Mathematica, and we'll talk about that later. You know, he got his PhD when he was 21 years old. Now, a picture on the front cover, I believe he was 22 at that time. He just transitioned to 22. But in 1950, when he got his when he wrote his dissertation for the PhD, his doctorates, he was 21 years old.
Wow.
This guy was a genius. I mean, when he got his letter of recommendation for Princeton, they wrote one sentence. Something like, "This guy is a genius." That was it. I mean, the guy could do differential equations and you know, phase in and phase out of different kinds of mathematics and put things together in a way that nobody had thought of before. So this guy was truly just super high IQ when it came to mathematics.
So just flat out mathematically gifted, but also sounded like the nurture was a big component, that he started studying deep mathematical topics, engineering at a young age.
He started studying math in a big way early on, and he stuck with it.
Did they test his IQ? Like what?
I don't know. IQ is a fuzzy thing, but mathematically, he was ahead of the game. I mean, way ahead of the game as far as his colleagues, yes.
Wow. And so he's just a prodigy then. Like some people are just born with this.
That's right. And then he got mixed in with all the other polymaths, prodigies that were that were very talented.
Wow. So interesting. Okay. You mentioned John Nash took the one economics class. Obviously, Satoshi Nakamoto had had a good understanding of the financial system, at least, obviously.
Yeah.
So what's the parallel there?
Well, as far as the economist, I would say Satoshi Nakamoto is running against the grain. He's obviously not a Keynesian. Mm-hmm. He does not believe in the elastic monetary system where you basically debase forever.
Yeah.
So I would say he's running against the grain. Clearly, he has a deep understanding of economics. Mm-hmm. Satoshi Nakamoto does. Mm. And if we can transition over to cryptographer, that's a very interesting topic because Nash really had a lot of exposure to cryptography. Princeton was the center of doing cryptography during World War II. They had some of the best talent right there at Princeton, and he was mixing with them. And in fact, he wrote a paper later on when he was at Rand about cryptography, and he was super into prime numbers and into refactoring. And that was the way of doing cryptography before elliptical curve cryptography showed up. And what's really interesting, we'll talk about this later, he was using prime numbers in the parameters within the elliptical curve cryptography to make it even stronger. So, I mean, that is a Nash signature, because he talked about that in his paper back in, I think it was 1954 or 55, in his paper, it was either his I think it was his cryptography paper or maybe his parallel processing. I think it was one of those two papers that he talked about putting it inside the parameters, precisely the same thing that Satoshi Nakamoto did.
Oh, so Satoshi did do that. Mm-hmm. Wow.
And that's why AI is not going to break this. I mean, you have cryptography within cryptography.
Wow. Interesting. I didn't know. Never heard of that, actually. Okay. Computer programming?
Nash developed all these ideas in 1950 when computers were not really there yet, and he would think about them and write about them, but in practice they didn't really show up where he could actually start doing programming until 1983, when he would go to the Princeton computer lab every day. And he called this his cognitive therapy later on. He called it his he also referred to it as his occupational therapy. So he was a good programmer. He was doing programming when they were doing those punch-out cards, and then he graduated into C and C++, which, by the way, as you know, Bitcoin is written with C and C++ and other scripting and elliptical curve cryptography. So the point is that he isn't well known for his computer programming, but the people that saw his work were really amazed by the brilliance that he would come up with. And it was meeting with one of his colleagues during his recovery that he asked him what he was working on, and he said, the Big Bang.
The Big Bang.
The Big Bang.
Did he ever elaborate on that?
Well, let's say that's part of his secret world.
Huh. Wow. Okay. You wrote, there's a long felt need, I presume, to solve the digital double spend.
Yeah. And I should have probably reordered this. I have 3 long felt needs.
Yeah.
I should have started with the long felt need of, let's call it the immortal equilibrium.
Okay.
And I believe he figured that out back in 1950. He did the digital transformation leading up to, probably 2006, somewhere around there. And then he discovered the hash cache, and converted that over to proof of work. And that provided 2 more innovations. So at the heart of Bitcoin, the real central innovation there, I believe, is the UTXO, doing the transaction. It's kind of, it's the, let's call it the fixed point theorem. It's the equilibrium. And the UTXO is that by doing those transactions. And it's wrapped with cryptography. And so that was the heart of Bitcoin. But then later he wrapped it again with 2 other long felt needs, which he wrote about before Bitcoin. And that was, one of them was decentralized majority decision making.
Okay.
So in the white paper, there's 2 innovations he talks about, Satoshi Nakamoto speaks of. And that is, the digital double spend problem, and he comes up with the solution. The Byzantine generals problem, right? And then also, right along with that, he's talking about the decentralized majority decision-making, which, by the way, proof of work also solves that problem too, simultaneously. But in the very center piece of that, the long-felt need that John Nash had was the immortal equilibrium. Transitioning the Nash equilibrium, which he observed and discovered back in 1950, and then doing the full digital transformation somewhere between 1983 all the way up to 2008. So, more than 20 years of development.
The farm at Okefenokee is a revolutionary new regenerative agricultural community. It features an 8,000 tree olive orchard, which they use to make their own olive oil, as well as a very large pecan orchard. All the animals on the farm are heritage animals, with some varieties over 100 years old and others thousands of years old. Fresh eggs are produced daily by the farm's chickens. Also, there are over 1,000 beehives that pollinate the over 200 heirloom fruits and vegetables and provide honey to all the residents. The farm makes its own molasses, unrefined sugar, herbs, and spices. The farm also features an herbal apothecary and a commercial kitchen. These are just a few reasons why the farm is the healthiest place on earth. To learn more about the healthiest place on earth, go to okefarm.com and use discount code BREEDLOVE for $21,000 off custom cabin pricing. Again, to learn more about the farm at Okefenokee, go to okefarm.com and be sure to tell them I sent you. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. The UTXO is an unspent transaction output. So this is, what are we saying? It's something that's provably hasn't been spent. Whereas if you send someone an email, right, you're sending them a copy of the thing. So they can basically respend it, right? They can forward the email to someone else, etc.
Yeah.
The problem with digital space, or digital money rather, was that, right? You can't have money that can just be spent more than once, because then it's not scarce. And if it's not scarce, then it can't be money. What was, when you say, I mean, it sounds like the immortal equilibrium is an extension of the Nash equilibrium, but it also solved Byzantine general's problem, which was, how do you pass a message through a network of antagonistic actors in a way that the message can come out on the other side the same as it went in, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, the rumor game, right? You tell someone the rumor and it passes around the circle. By the time it gets to you, it's a whole different rumor, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone kind of changes it along the way. Byzantine general's problem is like, how do you solve that? So Bitcoin also solved that, but it also solved the double spend problem, but it also solved the decentralized majority decision-making problem.
The governance, yes.
So are these all kind of different aspects of the same thing that it solved, or are these all different problems?
I would say it's 2 innovations that Nakamoto speaks. He speaks specifically of that innovation, of those 2 innovations in the white paper. And here's transitioning to the other connection is aware of all transactions. Okay. These are words directly from the white paper. The only way to confirm the absence of a transaction is to be aware of all transactions. So you have the public blockchain. And you can think of that fixed point theorem, or the equilibrium, as I kind of think of it as kind of like an all-seeing eye, which really isn't accurate. I think that's kind of soft. But that's one way to look at it. You have to be able to know that other transactions haven't occurred that are going to double spend that.
Right. Right.
So in that respect, it's kind of like an all-seeing eye. How do you do that?
Yeah, but the all-seeing eye sounds, it's a metaphor that invokes a centralization, you know, like the Eye of Sauron. But this is, everyone can see the entire history of everything that ever happened. So it's a billion all-seeing eyes.
That's
basically.
right. So I say that even though I title this as aware of all transactions, I quickly transition over to, that's a soft connection between Nash and Nakamoto. But what's a strong connection is the UTXO, because that kind of, let's say, polymath, bringing all, a UTXO is half a transaction, and it doesn't move again until the person with the private key who owns that half a transaction moves it to the next mailbox, so to speak. Right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's a half a transaction, and you look at it, you go, wow, this is amazing. I mean, who came up with this? I mean, the person was brilliant. And it's wrapped with all this amazing cryptography. So the UTXO, to me, it's the heartbeat of Bitcoin. It's kind of like the all-seeing eye for that brief moment for that block, knowing that there's no double digital spends previous.
Right.
So yeah, I think, I titled it "Aware of All Transactions" and tried to relate it to, let's call it the Nash fixed theorem that relates to the Nash equilibrium, right? But that's a soft connection. The UTXO, I look at that and go, ooh, that's Nash. That creation of the UTXO, that's the kind of stuff that Nash did that would just blow people away.
I actually didn't know that. So the UTXO is integral to letting the users see the entire history of transactions?
Well, it's an unspent transaction. And so it's just waiting there. And the only people who can move it are the people that have the private key to send it again. So it's like a half a transaction. It's just waiting. Where am I going to go?
Yes.
So the idea is only the person with that private key can say, you're going to go to this place.
Yes. No, I've got that. But how does that tie into aware of all transactions?
You have to know that money has never been spent twice. How do you do that?
Oh, okay.
So that UTXO needs to somehow reach out that those coins haven't been double spent.
Right.
So at that brief moment in time, it's kind of like the Eye of Sauron. It can see all the transactions,
right?
But not really. There's some tricks that Nakamoto did to make it happen.
Yeah. Okay. So the UTXO, the only way to know that it is a UTXO is to be aware of all transactions.
Yeah.
Right. That, these are all the transactions that have ever occurred. And this one has not been spent, basically.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And that was, I like I said, the UTXO is the innovation, but Nakamoto wrote about it in terms of double spend.
Got it.
He called that the innovation and the decentralized governance.
Got it. Okay. Calm, knowledgeable, collaborative, precise, no arrogance. These are descriptors of both Satoshi and John Nash?
Yeah. If you take a look at how he described Nakamoto, he describes him. I put in a lot of how Finney, just copy and paste what he wrote, and it really reveals that this guy was smart. He was knowledgeable. He was humble. And then if you take a look later on about what Judge Malore, let me get his name right. In the Craig Wright court case that happened over in the UK, where Craig Wright was forced to admit or publish
fake Satoshi, right?
Yeah, fake Satoshi.
Guy that pretended to be Satoshi for years, sued a bunch of people that said anything to the contrary.
So Justice Malore, he wrote, a calm, knowledgeable, collaborative, precise person with little or no arrogance, willing to acknowledge and implement ideas and suggestions from others. And that to me is, if you look at Nash and see his life, Nash was a humble guy. He knew he had illness. He is aware. You talk about the stigma of mental illness. He didn't try to say, let's not ignore this.
No.
He would just lay it out on the table, and he was very humble about it. And yet he was not confrontational. He would just, when confronted, he would just disappear and just withdraw. And if you look at, say, Peter Todd, people say he is Satoshi Nakamoto.
Nobody says that except that retarded HBO producer. Yeah. No one's ever said that with two.
But for me, it was instantly, no. He has this confrontational personality. You can see that happen. It's like, that's not how Nash comes through. Nakamoto comes through.
And he's not competent enough of a programmer.
I don't know about that, but
he's not.
Probably.
So he's not the personality type nor the competence. So definitely, that blew my mind. But the other thing, someone told me this the other day, that the same guy that made that HBO documentary, Money Electric, also came out and said they knew who Q was, as in the Q drops.
I'm not familiar with Q drops.
The whole, I actually just learned about it the other day too, but they were, the Q was releasing information about the deep state over time, but it's an anonymous person. Anyways, the same person that made that Money Electric documentary made another documentary claiming they knew the identity of Q, but they were also wrong about that. So it sounds like these are just puff pieces, propaganda even, trying to say like, don't look at Bitcoin. Here's the guy that invented it. He's some silly programmer. And if you buy Bitcoin, then you're supporting Peter Todd. It's like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
It's not at all what it is.
Well, I think anybody who is studying Bitcoin in depth quickly realizes how soft journalism is.
Yeah.
They're not reliable. And most people already are aware of that.
Yeah. The central bank press, as we should probably call it.
Yeah.
Plural
pronouns. That kind of threw me and threw most people. When you read the white paper, is this one person? Is this multiple people?
Mm-hmm.
And like we is an example of a plural pronoun. Mm-hmm. And so here's Satoshi Nakamoto signs it with one pseudonym, and yet he's talking about we. Mm-hmm. It's confusing. Well, John Nash does the same thing in his dissertation back in 1950 and his publication in 2002. So that's just one small attribute that ties the two together. Last correspondence. This is great because it ties into our previous conversation.
Oh, wait, we skipped one. Remnants of a Paranoid Secret World.
Oh, yeah, this one's great. Nash was afraid that there was like federal agents tracking him.
Yeah.
And people will say, oh, well, he was schizophrenic. He was paranoid schizophrenic. Well, maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe there's some truth. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, this guy was involved in some heavy duty cryptography. Yeah. He was doing game theory down at the Rand Corporation down in Santa Monica. This guy was doing game theory for nuclear warfare, perhaps.
Wow.
So, maybe there's some truth to that. But the parallel back to Satoshi Nakamoto is, when we remember the swarm is, you kick the hornet's nest, and now the swarm is going to come. That's a remnant of a paranoid person. Most people are just saying, oh, don't worry about it. Let's just have WikiLeaks use Bitcoin. He's like, no. And then he says that WikiLeaks has kicked the hornet's nest and the swarm is headed towards us. Now that's a remnant of what I would call
the paranoid world,
paranoid secret world. Or was it all that paranoid? Let me give you another example. I mean, here's a guy who thought he was the Prince of Peace when he was, going deep into his illness when he was about 29 years old. He thought he was the Prince of Peace. But Bitcoiners know that this does solve that international problem that he studied back at Carnegie Mellon before he even showed up at Princeton. That this does solve many international problems. And that maybe in the future we'll look back on Satoshi Nakamoto as being the Prince of Peace if we see Bitcoin as being a major milestone in human history. So, but let's get back to this.
Sorry, can I ask some questions before, unless before we proceed, were you going to go to the next one?
No, let's hang in there with
Okay.
remnants of a paranoid secret world. We need to talk about Calvin,
Okay.
or what? Oh, excuse me, Gavin Anderson.
Okay. Yeah.
Because remember when Gavin Anderson talked about, oh, I'm going to go to the CIA to talk about Bitcoin. Well, guess what happened to Satoshi Nakamoto? Disappears. So the last time he talks to Gavin, gone. Now that's a remnant of a secret paranoid world. So the point is yes, John Nash was schizophrenic. He was paranoid for 25 years of his life, but there's remnants of that throughout his life. He didn't want to get mixed up with that. And so to see Satoshi Nakamoto exhibit that same kind of attribute it's a connection. It doesn't surprise me now, but when I first encountered it, it's like this is a connection.
Interesting. Can we talk more about John Nash's sickness then? So was it just paranoid schizophrenia that he suffered from?
I haven't delved into his illness in a deep way. I'm really not knowledgeable on. I just know that he lost 25 years of his life, and in 1983, he started to come out of it and started to make friends with other students, and he wasn't so introverted. He started to come out of it.
Okay. But you said he thought he was the Prince of Peace. Like what was going on? What does that even mean? What is the Prince of Peace? Like
that's his secret world, and again, he was really into the equilibrium, the Nash Equilibrium. But he also had some other zany ideas, about Antarctica. Clearly it's schizophrenia, but sometimes there's truth mixed in. It's like our dreams are crazy, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes there's truth mixed in with these dreams.
Okay. So I'm just trying to get inside this guy's head a little bit, but he thought he was the savior of the world, like he was going to be usher in world peace.
It's how you interpret Prince of Peace,
But this is something he went around and called himself. Like what? How do we know that he identified as the Prince of Peace?
I know that when the medical people, he was institutionalized.
Okay.
And they documented his illness.
Okay.
And one of those things was he considered himself a Prince of Peace.
Got it. Okay. And so this would have been considered a delusion of grandeur, perhaps, when he's in his late 20s, whenever he was.
Plus 25 years.
Plus 25 years. So was he institutionalized for 25 years?
Off and on again. He didn't want to be institutionalized.
Well, yeah.
Keep in mind, schizophrenia is not necessarily a bad thing because these people really get into these emotional highs, like, hey, life is good.
Yeah.
And when they come back down, reality isn't all that good.
Interesting.
So schizophrenia is a mechanism. Now, this is my interpretation. It might be wrong, but it's an escape from reality, and it's a comfortable escape.
And so, why was he institutionalized? Was he a danger?
Schizophrenia. He was destroying his career. He was truly paranoid. He thought these federal agents were following him around. He was paranoid of, the central planners, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And
so this is like a stereotypical tinfoil hat kind of guy.
Yeah.
But
there's some truth to it.
But there's some truth to it because he's actually taking game theory to the next level, and game theory is
disruptive.
It's like, first of all, it was cutting edge mathematics of the century were related to game theory. Also, all the geopolitical strategy basically boils down to game theory, right? Like the nuclear stalemate and Cuban Missile Crisis, like all these things, not that occurred at that time, but these things all boil down to game theory ultimately, right? When you're trying to figure out what is your opponent going to do in these circumstances, that you end up in game theory, basically.
Well, there's two aspects of game theory in Bitcoin. One is proof of work. That's hardcore game theory, right? Just staying ahead of the bad actors. There's another aspect of game theory, and that's Bitcoin itself is, everyone works according to their self-interest, but by doing so, you create actually a very cooperative solution. We'll talk more about that later on.
Right. Okay. Got it. Okay. So the last correspondence and Nash's death correspond. Oh, the last correspondence from Satoshi Nakamoto corresponds with Nash's death.
Yeah. In 2014, we had the last communication from 2014. Satoshi says, "I am not Dorian Nakamoto."
Yeah.
Remember, Dorian was this Japanese guy, and Newsweek, in a very, without doing real research, they say he's Satoshi Nakamoto.
Central bank propaganda, once again.
And then all of a sudden, the media is all over this guy, disrupting his life, disrupting his family's life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a nightmare for this guy. And Satoshi Nakamoto obviously has empathy for this man, feels bad for him, and he comes out of the hiding and makes one more statement and says, "I am not Dorian Nakamoto," to try to make it easier for this guy's life. And very irresponsible on the part of Newsweek, but this is what journalists do. And then 2015, the next year, John Nash died in a tragic accident. He won another mathematical award. He and his wife were in a taxi going home, crashed, both of them were ejected from the car, died. So that corresponds. So that's just one more connection between Nash and Nakamoto in terms of the timeline.
So what was the time differential there of the last communication? Nash's
March
death?
7th, he says, I am not Dorian Nakamoto. And then John Nash died in 2015, May 15th. So March, about 1 year apart.
1 year. Okay.
Yeah.
So the last, okay. Interesting. Okay. Cooperative solutions from non-cooperative foundations. What does that mean?
This is Econ 101. This is supply and demand, right? Normally, if you have political money or even religious hierarchy, you're going to have the central planners say this is what you should do. But in supply and demand, when you have good money, the first person that really identified this, really the father of modern economics, was probably Adam Smith, writing in his writings, which was published in 1776. Scottish economist, wrote the Wealth of Nations, and he talked about the law of supply and demand and the relationship between the two. And he talked a lot about, people having these self-interests. The butcher guy is cutting up meat and doing a common good by making things more efficient for you, but it's out of his self-interest.
Yeah.
And he kind of wrote the relationship as the invisible hand.
Yeah.
So John Nash comes along, and it wasn't competitive with let's call it the Wealth of Nations, the invisible hand concept, but it mathematically defined the invisible hand with the equilibrium, and the relationships to the equilibrium are really standard measurements of value. Okay, so that mostly fixed point, the equilibrium, the Nash equilibrium, or later on the immortal equilibrium that John Nash talked about, which is really just the digital transformation. As it emerges, you're going to start building standard measurements of value across all those different relationships.
So then is a pricing system like market prices? These are little Nash equilibria. This is where, obviously there's producers that want to sell it as high as possible and consumers that want to buy it as low as possible.
Yes.
Yet the producer is serving the wants of the consumer. But they're also serving their own self-interest. So that's the non-cooperative dynamic that becomes a cooperative dynamic.
Yes, and it's so powerful that you use the Nash equilibrium for doing things that are predictive, such as like an F-15 going against a Soviet Union flight, and you can calculate when to fire and fly and then turn. So they are using Nash equilibrium and RAND to do that. But also within auctions, Nash equilibrium can be used to predict prices, kind of, sort of. But regardless, it became very valuable in this multi-billion-dollar industry, and it was used to help sell bandwidth when John Nash was going to win his award, he mentioned it. He said, "I anticipated this, that it would be used in economics."
Wow.
So it's a powerful Nash Equilibrium is a powerful set of axioms and theorems, and one of them being that fixed theorem and other theorems. About 4, roughly speaking, axioms and theorems that represent the Nash Equilibrium.
And that's what he won the Nobel Prize for?
Yes.
Was the Nash Equilibrium? Okay.
Yes. It was later called Nash Equilibrium.
Okay.
But in the paper, I think it was titled Non-Cooperative. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
So he wrote multiple papers in 1950 before he received his PhD. And that was his dissertation.
Oh, so he got this when he was 21.
He was 21 years old, and when he received his, he was either 21 or 22 when he received his PhD, or he received it when he was 21, and then like within weeks he turned 22.
What was the best book you read on John Nash while doing this?
I think the most well-documented one was A Beautiful Mind. The movie is a huge distortion of his life. You know, it takes his illness and really warps it in a way that is entertaining. I thought it was a great movie when I first saw it, you know, more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
It won Best Picture, but I look at it now and it's just like, to me, it's cringe because it's so distorted. And it's like, oh, you're not doing this guy justice.
Interesting.
You know, but the book, A Beautiful Mind, is a very good read. But again, it's more of a focus on his illness, not his accomplishments.
Oh, it is. Okay, what's more focused on, if someone wanted to delve into the mathematics and the mind of John Nash, what should they read?
Well, I think my book, Bitcoin and Nash Equilibrium, is by far the best book on focusing on his accomplishments as they relate to Bitcoin, because that's what I focused on. And in fact, I think this is actually, I'm not even going to say arguably, it is the best Bitcoin book out there if you want to understand what Bitcoin is and being able to articulate what the narrative is. Because after, you know, instead of spending 1,000 hours to understand Bitcoin, which you and I have done, you can read this in 3 hours. It's basically a Nash biography, and it touches upon all of his Bitcoin accomplishments. And that narrative is so simple compared to all the other stuff that when you start to listen to all the narratives that are in the Bitcoin community, it's like 90% of this stuff is noise. I mean, this is baggage. Hey, I brought baggage to Bitcoin. You know, I've written 2 other books on Bitcoin, and one of them was Apex Environmental Solution. I'm a conservationist, right? So I'm talking about how it can be beneficial to. It's really the Apex Environmental Solution, and it is.
It is,
because in our fiat world, any type of conservation effort is going to be overwhelmed by this artificial growth that fiat requires. So conservation efforts in our current monetary system are futile, all of them. And we need to transition back to a commodity-based monetary system. And so I wrote that, and it took a long time to write. It took me a year. And whereas this other book, Bitcoin and Nash Equilibrium, a little more than 4 months, just, you know, it was just a Nash biography. And I think it's the most concise, precise Bitcoin narrative out there. Everything else to me is like 90% baggage now.
Do you want to give your kids a foundation of freedom and understanding of Bitcoin and a healthy skepticism of government? Then you should try Tuttle Twins. It's a cartoon about a grandma with a time-traveling wheelchair who takes her grandkids on hilarious adventures to learn about economics and freedom. Think the education of Magic School Bus meets the comedy of The Simpsons. With Tuttle Twins, your kids can learn about Bitcoin from Satoshi Nakamoto, civil disobedience from Harriet Tubman, natural rights from John Locke, and how to destroy the economy from Karl Marx. Today, Hollywood greenlights a lot of woke content or mindless garbage. Each episode of Tuttle Twins is parent-funded, parent-vetted, and only released when it's parent-approved. Because Tuttle Twins is fan-funded, it was the world's first kids show to teach about Bitcoin. That episode alone has been seen over 40 million times and was tweeted about by Michael Saylor. You can watch episodes of Tuttle Twins for free right now. And if you like what you see, you can use code BREEDLOVE for 10% off a subscription to the Angel Studios app and watch all of the episodes. So go to angel.com/breedlove to discover Tuttle Twins today. And remember to use code BREEDLOVE for 10% off. One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. Do you think you know who will win the presidential election or how many seats the Democrats or Republicans will win in the House or Senate? Well, there's finally a legal way to bet on the outcome of these elections via a platform called Kalshi. Kalshi is the first legal exchange where you can bet on any event, including but not limited to elections. Kalshi has markets on who will win the presidential election, who will control the House and Senate, who will win swing states, and more. Kalshi is already being used by hundreds of thousands of people and has facilitated over $1 billion worth of trades. Let's take an example. Right now, Trump and Kamala are trading about 50-50, meaning you can place a bet on either and you will double your money if they end up winning. That's pretty good, and Kalshi has hundreds of markets just like this for you to go and play in. So go to kalshi.com/breedlove today to start playing in this predictions market. The first 500 traders who deposit $50 will get a free $20 credit. Again, that's kalshi.com, KALSHI.com/breedlove. So besides your own book, which obviously you're biased, like was there a certain book you read that gets into...
Yeah.
I'm asking selfishly here because like if I want to get into Nash Equilibrium and learn more about his views on game theory and mathematics, where do I go?
I think Jeff Booth's A Price of Tomorrow is my all-time favorite Bitcoin book. That's the one that really read. But I was a Bitcoiner.
Not as it pertains to Bitcoin. I'm talking about just John Nash. Doesn't have to be about Bitcoin at all. I just want to get into the mathematics, game theory of John Nash. The Beautiful Mind. I'm trying to how do you look into this guy's actual mind?
Yeah, it's pretty tough to do that. Even his...
You just got to read his work, I suppose.
You do. And even like his 2008 publication, I mean, it's all this abstract mathematics. But I put this at the very end of the book because it really cinches it. And it's, two's company, three's the crowd. And he throws out that meme to summarize all this abstract algebra. But he does that to say basically person-to-person transactions are going to win out over these more cumbersome, I
was saying peer-to-peer is superior to third-party mediated.
More efficient. And he proves it out mathematically and using C++. So why would he do all that mathematical algebra, abstract math that you and I don't really understand that well? That was his world. And that's what can we read his work and really understand it? It's pretty challenging. But you can look at his conclusion and go, well, that makes sense.
Interesting. Okay. Classical liberalism and free market capitalism.
Oh, this one's great.
You mentioned John Nash took one economics course.
Well, a lot of Bitcoiners they're into Hayek and here, classical liberalism and free market capitalism. This was Hayek. That was his thing, and here Nash is saying in 2010, Jacques Rueff, F.A. von Hayek, and R. Mundell are notable scholars and economists who have particularly contributed to the theories of how a system of monies might be improved in an effectively revolutionary fashion. So here Nash is paying, tribute, or saying, hey, these guys are onto something more or less. And then later on, he says that he's aligned with Hayek's, thinking. So clearly, he's in alignment with these guys. And Hayek prophesied that Bitcoin would happen, right?
Yeah.
Hayek says there's got to be a sly roundabout way effectively to get there.
Yeah, he said something like, I don't think we'll ever have a good money again unless by some sly roundabout way we find a way to introduce something they cannot stop, they being the government.
So here's Hayek prophesying that Bitcoin is going to happen in the future through a sly roundabout way. And that's exactly what Bitcoin is.
So you think John Nash took that way to heart, right? Introduce something they cannot stop. I mean, there are multiple layers to playing that game. One of which that's very important. This is like, okay, obviously we're building toward an idea, right? That maybe John Nash was more than just an inspiration of Satoshi Nakamoto, and maybe he was part of, or even indeed Satoshi Nakamoto himself. But this idea that to play that game, to introduce something that no centralized power can stop, he had to play the mythology game even, which is mind-blowing to me. So do you think John Nash figured out that? Basically, it's like he had to be this Satoshi Nakamoto character and disappear?
Yeah, I firmly believe Nash and Nakamoto are the same person. They're the same person. I was like 98% there when I started writing this book, but now I'm like not only more than likely like 99.9%. This guy's probably the same. Here's a 2007 quote. This is before the 2008 white paper. Okay. This is John Nash writing. I learned of the work and publications of Friedrich von Hayek. I must say that my thinking is apparently quite parallel to his thinking in relation to money, and particularly with regard to non-typical in relation to the functions of the authorities. There's that secret world. He has that paranoia.
But he's right.
The authorities.
I mean, whether or not they're actually monitoring him and pursuing him, I don't know. But he seems to at least be right in his assessment of their objectives and their character.
Well, let's talk about the next one. I got 18. Like I was reading on Twitter the other day, people were talking about, I can't remember who it was. They're talking about how John Nash in the code talks about poker like 72 or 78 different references. Well, Satoshi does in the code, but not John Nash is talking about poker all the time when he's talking about the bargainer's game or the bargainers. I forget which paper that is. But again, there's another connection. So there's many more connections that I'm writing here.
Okay.
And the 18, I talk a lot about some of John Golson's work, and he was researching this before I showed up.
Okay.
He was finding these connections. And so I follow John on Twitter, and I've also read his papers out on Medium, and he's over on the UK. And I just want to say that I really enjoy following his work, and he continues to work on this. He really enjoys it.
Same thesis.
Yeah.
That Satoshi is John Nash are the same person.
Yeah, he was convinced of it before I was.
Okay.
And I was like 98% there, but I wasn't absolutely sure. I'll never say absolute. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
But I would say much, much more than likely.
Just convinced, basically.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, that certainly is fascinating. It's amazing how much we talk about game theory and Bitcoin and how influential John Nash has been in the sphere of game theory. I mean, this is all news to me. His economics background, his cryptography background, his programming background, his mathematician background, and then all of this sort of philosophical alignment with establishing an immortal equilibrium, decentralizing decision making, solving the double spin problem, like these things, it is somewhat convincing. What is the counter evidence? Are there critics of this? Are there people that think, are there big pieces that have been introduced that say, no, it can't be, these guys can't be the same person because X?
I would say John Nash is not a charismatic person. It's not easy, and the stigma of mental illness. I think people just can't comprehend that somebody like this could have created Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is truly an amazing creation. But so was Nash Equilibrium.
Well, I would think someone like this could not have created. I would think the opposite. I would think only someone like this could have created it.
I think you're right. He was a lone wolf. He was a beautiful mind. He was a genius. This is somebody that worked on this for more than 10 years, probably 20, in terms of doing the digital transformation, just that part of it alone.
Yeah.
It's just so flawless. I mean, Bitcoin, the code, it is so stable. Mm-hmm. He released it into the wild, and it's still running with a higher percentage of stability than any other network that's out there.
Yeah.
It's an amazing creation.
And it's not just the engineering itself. I mean, yes, it's a work of art, basically, right? It's a digital masterpiece.
It is.
But the release of it, where it was released, when it was released, how it was released, like these are levels to the game that are not in the protocol layer. Yeah. So whoever did this was playing both the engineering protocol game, but also the social geopolitical game.
So the fact that the white paper was published on Halloween, October 31st, to me, there's kind of a anti-establishment, anti-central planning statement just in the date that it was published.
Yeah, I mean, it does make you wonder who the hell could be capable of playing so many levels of these different games at the same time. That's why I think a lot of people think it wasn't one person. They think it was a coordinated effort amongst some group of people.
If it was a group of people, you can't keep a secret.
Right. This is true.
Well, the next section I think is great. Bitcoin equilibrium is a standard measurement of value. That's really the prize. That's the prize. It's emerging. The Bitcoin equilibrium is emerging. And that equilibrium is interconnected with a standard measurement of value. Mm-hmm. That too is emerging. Mm-hmm. And that's the price. Mm-hmm. Is that, the central planners, the fiat central banks, they claim they bring stability when in fact they don't. Mm-hmm. With every bailout, it's a bigger bailout. It's going into a debt super cycle. Mm-hmm. And as bond volatility continues to grow, and they've been losing money for the past 3 years, it's only going to get worse in the long run. Mm-hmm. A commodity-based monetary system will be emergent and show that it has much greater resilience and stability than these debt-based monetary systems. And so that's what he talked a lot about. He talked a lot about standard measurement of value in his writings, John Nash did, from 2002 to the rest of his life.
Interesting. And he used that terminology, measurement of value.
Yeah.
That's interesting because the Austrian economists it's a semantic quibble perhaps, but they would say, no, value is a subjective phenomenon, can only be imputed by what an individual does, right?
Yeah.
So to walk to the other side of the room is to intend to walk to the other side of the room. And you can tell me you value it, but I'm not going to believe you until I see you walk to the other side of the room, which implies you valued being in spot B more than you valued being in spot A.
What you're talking about is a great concept. And, I know you read Persig, Zen of Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
And
I read
Lula,
that.
yeah.
I read that in my 20s, and I loved all the way he broke down a lot of the philosophies, and it made sense to me. But then he came to this conclusion about quality. And as a young 20-year-old, I couldn't get it. And I read his book Lula, and I'm kind of getting it. But it was Bitcoin that really helped understand what is money, what is value, what is quality.
Yes.
Even in terms of, let's even take it one more step. What is consciousness? I mean, when you're quantifying value and quality through Bitcoin, through these transactions.
Yeah.
And by studying Bitcoin, you start to understand what is money. And it's not easy. It's really a metaphysical, it's an emergent attribute that comes, and that's the prize.
Yeah. Well, value is that which all action is aimed at, right? Like whatever you're doing purposefully, consciously, that means you think that path is better than where you currently are. So it means you value that path more than where you currently are.
Yeah.
And that's about all we can say about value, right? I think that's why Austrians have the quibble, I'll call it at least, that you can't measure that. You can't actually quantify that. But we need to have a social approximation of that. And so the language they would use is something like pricing is a social appraisal of value. Right? Like there's no number for how valuable is this table? Like, well, it depends. What are your aims? Am I trying to rest my bottle on it? Am I trying to jump over it?
Yeah.
Hayek would say all value is ordinal, right? It's just the thing you prefer to do first, second, third, fourth.
Yeah.
You can't put a cardinal number to it. You can't say, oh, this table has a value of 48, right? That doesn't make any sense. But we need to be able to do that for other people, to have basically pricing so we can coordinate our actions in the marketplace. So this weird metaphysical, philosophical line between quality or value and quantity, it's like this uncrossable chasm, but we have to approximate it, I guess, through the medium of money and pricing. So that's why I was asking, like, if he used that language, standard measurement of value, because someone like Hayek would not appreciate that. Or would at least correct Mr. Nash on that particular language.
Well, this gets into, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. If we go way back in time, back before Nash showed up at Princeton, there was a guy, von Neumann, who was writing about game theory and was well known. And he was not really talking about, value, standard measurements of value. He was really talking about game theory in terms of groups of people and more kind of from a central perspective, as more, less so from a subjective, right? And then, Nash shows up and kind of blows all that away. And you can compare that same conversation is still happening today between Ethereum and Bitcoin. It's like, is it all these smart contracts, or is it something more fundamental that's really important here? And this was the same conversation that was going on back in 1950 between von Neumann and Nash. And von Neumann writes off Nash as saying, equilibrium, it's too simple. It's too simple. No, we need to get into these other, bigger groups, and he was looking at it more from a centralized perspective.
Right.
So that was the key difference. And you can clearly see that Nash was more on the Hayek way of measuring value.
Gotcha. I thought you were going to go towards Marxism and individualism there, actually, because Marxism has this whole philosophy of class warfare, right? There's the working class and but then someone like Mises or Hayek would say, no, the world is composed of acting individuals.
Yeah.
There are no class, like there's no class consciousness or class that thinks or has a purpose or acts. Like it's just arbitrarily circumscribed group of people. Like, oh, these are the rich. Like, well, who's the rich? It's like, who do you call the rich? There's no like bright line that these are the rich, these are the middle class, these are the poor. what's reality? Like that's a low resolution depiction of reality. A high resolution depiction of reality is looking at individuals, and that individuals have aims and purposes and engage in action. That's reality.
Well, von Neumann really talked about coalitions.
Right. That's what I was saying. Like coalitions are classes.
That's a very generalized way of looking at it.
That's a Marxist way to look at the world.
Yeah, and that's the way Ethereum thinks it's all about. That's the narrative of Ethereum. We got to do smart contracts. It's like, no, you're missing the point of what Bitcoin, the original intent of Bitcoin, and that is equilibrium, which is interrelated with standard measurement of value. If you take a Nash perspective, and it's very simple once you start to understand that, and that relates back to Adam Smith, the invisible hand, supply and demand. These are fundamental elements that relate to each other. And so Nash Equilibrium, 1950, then 2009, the digital transformation, Bitcoin.
Wow. So, well, we all know this, right? Bitcoin eliminates inflation.
Insidious inflation, and it increases the velocity of value. International peace dividend, and that relates all the way back to the original Carnegie Mellon course that he took about the problems with international relations when you have multiple currencies. John Nash took that class. Cost of living decreases. That's the same thing as one. I was hanging out at dinner with some people, and let's say they're part of the financial class. And I asked them the question, is it good when when prices go up or when they go down? And the whole table's like, oh, when prices go up, that's good. Because these are people that hold assets, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But as an engineer, I've been working my entire life to try to make things more efficient. I'm trying to bring prices down. It's like, here are people who are trying to do just the opposite of what I'm trying to do. And so with these artificially low interest rates, we're driving prices up with housing. And this is the long-term consequence of Keynesianism. Yeah. This is the long-term consequence of trying to maximize your GDP as opposed to trying to reduce the cost of things.
Yeah. First of all, those guys are full of shit. Hayek would say what everyone actually wants is the price of things that they are selling and own to go up. The cost of things that they are buying to go down.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's what people actually want. No one wants general prices to go up or general prices to go down. You want specific prices of the things that you own to go up, or that you are going to be producing and selling to go up, but the things that you are buying to go down, right? That's self-interest.
Well, as an aerospace engineer, I want to optimize things to be more efficient,
Well, exactly. So what you're saying from an entrepreneurial producer standpoint is you actually want to solve problems better, faster, cheaper, right? Increase human productivity. And this is something that, when I hear people, you talk about people in the financial class saying that they think prices going up is a good idea. These people aren't actually thinking. They're just
investors.
But they're not thinking. They're just regurgitating whatever Keynesian conditioning they have received at university, or probably not even at university at this point, just watching CNBC or whatever dumb fucking propaganda they watch. They don't even think. They just literally parrot
is
what is
GDP
said.
going up in price always good? When we centralize the economy, is that always good? I don't think so. If you're going to be making things more efficient, like, you get rid of the mail system because of email, you're going to have GDP going down. And from an engineering perspective, from a technologist perspective, that's a good thing. Yeah. So it depends on your perspective.
I don't know if GDP is the right metric. I don't know.
It's a highly centralized metric.
Yeah, for sure. And what is the right metric? I mean, I think it's probably some composite of standards of living. Right? It's like, are people's standards of living improving? Right?
I think Bitcoin is going to become that standard, and you can simply divide it by the number of people. So you're going to be able to see wealth per capita. That's going to be a much more efficient measurement of progress than GDP in the future.
Yeah, but what is it going to be measured against? It can't just be Bitcoin supply per capita, because it's always going to go down.
It's all part of that standard measurement of value as it relates to an equilibrium, and that's emerging. The equilibrium is emerging. We don't have it yet. But if you look at history, what money comes from is a commodity-based I mean, it could be cattle, it could be trading tobacco in early America. That's the main commodity, and that's the equilibrium, because people could, buy a bale of tobacco, hold on to it, and sell it later on when the riverboat came along. That was the equilibrium at one time. That was money. And so I think the revolutionary approach of money is flawed. The evolutionary creates a much more stable ecosystem.
Yeah, I actually think these big, broad, sweeping, centralized metrics are just going to go away, along with centralized power.
Yeah.
Like, we can make different approximations and different ways to look at the wealth of the world. But the idea that GDP is the thing, right, that we should all index to, that is deeply flawed.
It's deeply flawed. It's good for comparing different countries, but even in that respect, it can be very flawed.
Yeah. Yeah. And even inflation's another one of these metrics. It doesn't, and Mises makes this point, like, it's actually impossible to measure inflation. Same thing with the value problem, actually. You cannot assign a cardinal number to inflation because it is as subjective as the things you wish to buy, basically. Yeah. Right? It's as subjective as your preferences. My inflation coefficient is different than your inflation coefficient because I'm buying different things and seek to buy different things than you. Right? There is no number out there called inflation. Yet we have all, people believe that there is. And then it just opens up all of this attack surface for psychological exploitation that people think like, oh, well, I was told inflation's good and they told me it's 2% and that's fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you dumb? Like, how much has your grocery bill gone up in the past 4 years? Well, I bet it's more than 2%.
It's just something people don't really think about. I mean, they're watching a football game or something like that.
But that's part of it. That's what I'm saying is people are being conditioned into this, or hypnotized even, into this bread and circuses, Circus Maximus 2024. Ignore your grocery bill and just watch, drink the Bud Light and watch the football. Don't ask questions about the inflation metric or GDP. Like, we've got it.
Yeah.
It's these false high priests that are able to be in these positions of power because they, have these sacred numbers that no one understands, yet everyone worships. And it's just like that all needs to just go away.
Yeah.
Because if you actually understand any of it, it's like none of it works. It's used just for that purpose, actually. Like, if you want to know what is the purpose of an inflation metric, it's that. It's to hypnotize people into believing that the government has it all under control, and the pain you're feeling isn't as real as you think it is.
And never mind the debasement. It's according to the central bankers, they never talk about the debasement relating to inflation. Have you noticed that?
No, yeah,
it's always some other.
I'm sorry. Yeah, even when I use the word, we really need to pick a new word. This is part of the language game that we're trapped within. Inflation itself is a euphemism, right? What we're talking about is monetary depreciation or debasement.
Yeah, it's a 23-month lag after debasement typically.
Price inflation is a consequence of that, right?
Yeah.
You're just printing more money, chasing the same amount of goods and services, prices go up.
Yeah.
Right? And so the people that get the money first benefit at the expense of those who get it later, right? It is literally just a wealth redistribution scheme.
Yes.
But then they can put all that, because people don't understand any of that, you can blame the producers, right? Yeah. It's these greedy ice cream producers.
Greedy corporations.
Yeah.
We didn't debase the money.
Right. Yeah. I always like to give the example of chicken eggs, because they say, it's like, oh, did the chickens get more greedy too? Like, why did the price of eggs go up so much?
Yeah.
It's like, the chickens stopped laying eggs as quickly in the past 4 years.
And we never did any deficit spending,
Right. Yeah.
Come on.
Even that is a fucking euphemism. What is a deficit? A deficit means it's a business running at a loss, spending money that it doesn't have. How do they cover the gap? They print money. So it's like, we need to get very, more precise in our vernacular. And it's basically money printing, right?
Yeah.
You trace it down. It's like money printing is the problem. Money printing is the problem. Money printing is the problem. What's the solution? The immortal equilibrium of unprintable money.
Yes. Exactly. 21 million. That's it.
Yeah.
I want to read to you a quote from John Nash, Ideal Money, 2002. The best part of the writing is actually about 70 different references. That's the best part of the book. And if you just go through and read those direct quotes, it's valuable. Now, in Nash's own words, in terms of the prize, I titled that political corruption will diminish. But in his own words, he says, depending on how things were fundamentally arranged, the probabilities of serious damage through political corruption might become as small as the probabilities that the values of the standard meter and kilogram will be corrupted.
Wow.
So standard measurement of value.
Yes. Wow.
Based on a commodity-based monetary system that emerges.
Wow. Okay. So he's basically saying this asymptotically ideal money could resist political corruption to the same extent the metric system resists political corruption.
It's just as powerful. It will become just as reliable as the metric system itself.
Wow. And that is a good analogy for Bitcoin, actually, the metric system of money.
Exactly. And this next section, I really love, departures of the standard measurement of value. Because if you look at all these fake Satoshis, they don't even know what Bitcoin is. Look at fake Satoshi. Did he ever talk about standard measurement of value? Did he ever talk about equilibrium? No.
I don't even know who. Oh, this is Craig Wright we're talking about.
He had no clue. He's always talking about something else.
He's a complete charlatan, and thank God it's finally been legally proven that he is.
But I also want to talk about Ethereum. Ethereum has a meandering narrative. World computer, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. And Vitalik never talks about standard measurement of value. He never talks about equilibrium emerging. He talks about hard money, and then what does he do? He says, we're going to reduce the supply. He's just like a central banker trying to manipulate the money to make it more valuable for short-term gain and long-term instability.
Yes.
So, this guy is no different than a CBDC, and long-term, it's a really bad investment.
Yeah.
Whereas Bitcoin is, I believe the original intent of Bitcoin is about an equilibrium and the emerging standard measurement of value. It's not a meandering narrative.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's decentrally planned, basically, whereas Ethereum is centrally planned.
Yeah.
What was Ethereum talking about that one time? That they wanted to be instead of being hard money, which was fixed supply, they wanted to have an actual decreasing supply. They call it like super hard money.
Yeah. It's like you missed the point again.
Yeah.
You went from stupid back to the other side of stupid.
It's the other side of stupid, yeah. The whole point is to have something that is as unchangeable as possible.
Yes.
Which you can't do when you have the possibility of a human interfering with and changing the rules or the supply.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the whole point, is to get the politics and the politicking out of the monetary system.
Yeah.
Right? We always say, it would be great if we could get the money out of politics. Like, well, that's never going to happen because guess what? Humans are political animals and we all like money. So that's not going to happen. But what you can do, at least to a very significant extent, is get the violent fiat politics out of money.
Yeah.
And that's what Bitcoin does.
Fiat is the root of all evil. It really is. Bitcoin is, an honest ledger is the root of all good.
Yeah.
It really does enable non-cooperative behavior to become cooperative.
Yes.
And if you take a look at it's even corrupted the SEC. You look at Bitcoin. Here's clearly a decentralized. It's not a security, and it took more than 10 years for it to become an ETF. And yet within 1 year, Ethereum, which is more centralized than Bitcoin, which is not a commodity, they get their ETF right after Bitcoin gets their ETF. Gensler needs to lose his job. The SEC has abandoned the Howey test. When Ethereum got its ETF, it is a security because it does pass the Howey test. What is the Howey test? There's like 4 different rules to it, but basically, does it qualify as an investment contract? Right? That's fundamentally the Howey test. There's 4 prongs to it. There's all these smart contracts within. Again, it gets back to that von Neumann coalitions. You're getting into all this complexity. Bitcoin doesn't have that. It should become an ETF 10 years ago, but it was stalled by political corruption. And then Ethereum comes again. SEC has abandoned the Howey test, and I don't know if that's ever going to be challenged, but yeah, Gensler needs to lose his job over this.
Well, yeah, in the long run, I think Bitcoin obliterates the SEC and a lot of other three-letter agencies. So in the long run, it won't matter.
I think the SEC still has a need, but the fact that it is politically corrupted, it needs to be scaled way back. I think there's some elements.
I mean,
of the SEC.
you can have basically the entire purpose of government is the preservation of life, liberty, and property, right? To the extent that SEC is actually protecting people from actual fraud, okay, that version can exist. The SEC in its current format is not
Well,
that.
in terms of investment contracts, I think it is helpful to have disclosures. And when you are a security, those kind of disclosures, I think, can help reduce some of the corruption in this world. So I think at that layer, if they're honest disclosures, I think that can be helpful.
Yeah, I would agree, but I would say you don't need the law to impose or enforce that. I think a market solution, just basically those who make those disclosures will raise money in a market that has actual private property enforced, and those that do not make those disclosures will get fucking sued or will not get business.
I would like to see Ethereum as it is a security, and I would like them to be making full disclosure of who's behind it, and what their inner workings are. I would like to see that fully disclosed with Ethereum.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen with Ethereum is that it's going to just crash and burn like every other shit coin at some point.
Over time, yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be some technical implosion, and if not, there will just be the long run economic destruction by Bitcoin, basically.
Yeah.
So,
well, I get into, Bitcoin is really our only hope for real wages, real savings, real debt relief. We're in a, 35 trillion, growing a trillion per 100 days now. It's inescapable. So, but really the conclusion I get into, and I talk about three parallels, and I just want to reemphasize this, that there's really three parallels going on. One is Smith, two is the 1950 Nash Equilibrium, and then the 2009 Bitcoin. It's all the same phenomena. They're talking about, first of all, Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, he's talking about the invisible hand, Econ 101, the relationship between supply and demand. Nash defined that mathematically with roughly four very powerful, indisputable axioms and theorems. And then Bitcoin comes along and builds this mechanism by which an equilibrium, a commodity-based monetary system, can emerge from that. And I think we're going to get there eventually.
before starting the What is Money show, I spent most of my career as a CFO, overseeing internal technology implementations and business acquisitions. Over the next 10 years, it is projected that over 12 million businesses in the US will be sold. If you are an operator running a business generating between $5 and $200 million of revenue, and you're considering selling your business within the next decade, then there is a significant opportunity for you to deploy technology to streamline business processes, reduce operating costs, and enhance the multiple your business ultimately sells for. To this end, I am partnering with the team at Emerge Dynamics, a firm with decades of experience in maximizing the value of privately held small and middle market businesses. Go to emergedynamics.com/breedlove to learn how you can build an attractive, high multiple company that maximizes your return when you fully exit. Again, that's emergedynamics.com/breedlove. This December 17th to 21st, 2024, join me on the Pacific coast of Mexico for our men's retreat, The Art of Alpha. At this world-class retreat center, we will have daily meditations, movement practices, yoga, cold plunging, infrared sauna, and many other biohacking modalities, all while enjoying world-class cuisine designed for optimal full-body health. The retreat center is a gorgeous biohacker's paradise located right on the ocean. You can think of this place as a nervous system reset facility. At The Art of Alpha, we are seeking men who wish to cultivate freedom, wisdom, sovereignty, physical fitness, truth, and love in themselves and in those who look up to them. If you've always felt motivated to push yourself to new limits to discover the best version of yourself, but you've struggled to find the right community to immerse yourself in, then The Art of Alpha is for you. To apply to join The Art of Alpha, go to breedloveevents.com. Again, that's breedloveevents.com to apply to join us for the Art of Alpha on the Pacific coast of Mexico this December 17th through 21st, 2024. So would you say then, like, yeah, because Smith's invisible hand really depends on price discovery ultimately, but you can't have accurate price discovery in a world with fiat funny money, basically. So in a way, Bitcoin is like optimizing the function of Smith's invisible hand by optimizing price discovery.
Yes. It is.
So that's the chain that's the conceptual chain from Adam Smith to Satoshi Nakamoto.
From
basically.
people like you and me who decide what our value is
Exactly.
and what we're willing to trade
Right,
it for, not
right.
some central planning organization.
Right. You consensually decide to express your preferences in the marketplace with other consenting market actors that are not subjected to coercion and thus the manipulation of prices that result from that.
Well, I do want to touch on this last
That does sound like the Prince of Peace, by the way. So maybe that is.
He is. Someday Nakamoto will be recognized when Bitcoin emerges and becomes a standard measurement of value.
And dissolves all the nation states.
And allows international relationships to work in a non-cooperative way, but in a roundabout way creates a cooperative relationships. Nakamoto will be recognized as the Prince of Peace in the future, I believe. But the one thing that I want to also bring up, and this is my last paragraph, is in 2010, he does that paper, that mathematical, abstract mathematics, and comes to the conclusion, two's companies, three's a crowd. Again, that's a decentralized meme. Two's companies, three's a crowd. And that's the end of the book. But, we started at the 18 connections. The beginning of the book is really the beginning of John Nash's biography.
So should we go through John's biography?
I think it's fascinating.
Okay.
I mean, the biography brings the human connection to Bitcoin, I believe. And it really simplifies the original Bitcoin intent, simplifies the narrative. Like I said, I brought baggage to Bitcoin. I think most Bitcoiners bring their baggage to Bitcoin. 90% of the stuff out there, after writing this, I just look at it now, it's like 90% of the stuff people are talking about is their personal baggage.
What do you mean when you say, like, what baggage are we talking about?
Well, I'm really interested in conservation, you know, so I wrote a book on Apex Environmental Solution.
Oh, okay. I see
or people that want to talk about, your individual sovereignty and you shouldn't have to get shots for COVID. That's a big deal for a lot of Bitcoiners. But I think that's baggage. I think that isn't central to the original Bitcoin intent. It's related, but it's your personal baggage. It's not Bitcoin's original intent. Now, it can certainly help facilitate those personal desires, in terms of individual freedom and individual empowerment, sovereignty. Yes, I agree with that. But when you study Nash, it gives a very simplified, clean, most efficient Bitcoin narrative that's out there.
I've heard it's said that Bitcoin is like a mirror, right? That
it's like tofu; it just absorbs your flavor.
Yeah, well, it's however you look at it, you're gonna find something about it. You find something of yourself in it, I guess, in one way or another. But maybe this is more like the nature of money itself, because money it's one of these relational tools like language itself, right? Like the word is not the thing which it represents, but the word represents the thing. So words are kind of like a reflection, and it's a tool we use for cognitive reflection about things. And so money similarly lets us reflect on economic reality, right? We can interpret it through prices rather than having to go and investigate all the business activities people are engaged in. So if Bitcoin is perfect money, then maybe it's just a very well polished mirror. And so people do see certain things.
It represents your values, Money represents your values.
Yeah.
How you spend it.
Yeah.
So, well, at the very beginning, we've already covered a lot of these topics, but I think the dates are really good for the chronology. Back in 1942, he's 14 years old. He's out in West Virginia. His father's an electrical engineer. He reads Men of Mathematica, these great mathematicians that he basically becomes a template for him throughout his life. And he read that. And that's at the time when, World War II, I think Midway was happening with the Japanese and the U.S. battling out. And here he is in West Virginia reading Men of Mathematica. And then, how many years later, 14 to 21 years old, roughly 7 years later, he has his PhD. He's yeah, amazing. 14 years old.
Was his dad teaching him too?
His dad was brilliant, electrical engineer. Yeah, smart guy.
But was his dad actively teaching him, like trying to groom him to become
clearly
this?
he gave him influence. He's at 14 years old. Sure. He's reading a book called Men of Mathematica.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so yes.
Wow.
And then we get into the next big one. Even before, 1944, even before Nash is on the scene, von Neumann, this guy basically optimized the lens for the nuclear bomb, right? Von Neumann at Princeton was a big name, had his groupies, his followers, his students, and they were all following him along in game theory and his coalitions. And then young 21-year-old Nash rolls in. He isn't a groupie. He does his own thing. He's going to be Men of Mathematica. He's going to observe a new, solution. And he's not really into the coalitions. He's, for his own reasons, he's more into individual sovereignty for whatever reason. But he is.
Because he's smart.
And he looks at it and says, oh, that's too complicated.
Yeah.
We'll just use this fixed point theorem, build an equilibrium, and he writes the paper, and I can bring up the title of that now. Non-Cooperative Games, that's his dissertation. Non-Cooperative Games.
Does it effectively debunk von Neumann's work?
Complements it.
Oh, complements
Simplifies it.
Okay. So
and von Neumann rejected it.
Yeah.
Saying that was too simple.
Yeah.
But
yeah, Occam's razor.
That's right. That's right.
So do you think the war had a big impact on him? You said he was growing up during the war of reading Men of Mathematica.
Yeah.
Where was his father working? Did it say?
I don't recall. I do know that when he rolled into Princeton, the war was over. And so here's all these young people coming into school, and he's right next to the center of cryptography that broke the codes.
Broke Enigma for the Nazis.
Japanese codes were broken also.
Okay.
I mean, the hub of cryptography was at Princeton at that time.
Wow.
And here he is mixing it up with these guys.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So he was literally in the hot seat for
and really into prime numbers. And
Yeah.
in fact, when he lost it, he was actually given a presentation on, prime numbers. And so, yeah, he was really into that stuff.
Interesting.
So in 1954, 1950, he does multiple papers, gets his PhD, goes down to Santa Monica. He's working at Rand Corporation, writes a paper on parallel computing. What is that? Decentralized parallel computing.
Okay.
Decentralized network, that's Bitcoin. He's writing a paper about a decentralized parallel computing, 1954.
Yeah.
So it's the basic idea of parallel control is to decentralized control.
Right.
1955, he writes a paper over to the United States. It's about his encryption-decryption machine. He founded some, rather than having absolute cryptography, it was probabilities, kind of like just staying ahead of the bad actors, right? That was the concept here that was leading the cryptography, rather than having an absolute secret, it was dealing with these probabilities that was introduced in this paper. It was very good. But then he got involved with other things, and he went to MIT, and he's having a promising career. He went through some personal trauma. One thing is he had a girlfriend. Multiple traumas. He was arrested in Santa Monica for allegedly, exposing himself in a bathroom. And this was something that some people believe caused trauma. I don't think so, because he recovered from that. He lost his job. So more than likely he was bisexual. He lost his job, but he went back and his career continued. Went to MIT. He was still writing papers. He married. Now this is where I think the real trauma happened. Is he got his girlfriend pregnant, and he married Alicia, another girl, and the girl who got pregnant, who had his son, called John Nash's father, told him about the love child. John Nash's father was very upset, gave him a call and said, go to Boston and marry that girl. John Nash couldn't. He wouldn't. He ended up marrying Alicia. And soon after that, John Nash's father, John Nash Sr., died of a massive heart attack, had a massive heart attack, and then died soon after that. And that, I believe, based on what his friends were saying, that's when John Nash started to lose it and just lost his rationality. And
he felt guilty about that.
Massive trauma for John Nash was having his father lose respect for him.
Damn.
Yeah. So about 29, I believe, that's when he was presenting.
Lose respect, and then his father died. So presumably there was like some unresolved bitterness between them.
Huge weight on. He had a lot of respect for his father, and his father came down on him, go marry that girl. He couldn't marry her, so he married this other woman originally from El Salvador, and I think she was a physicist, but more or less dropped out of that to take care of John Nash. He was on his path to becoming homeless, and during his illness, and it was because of her. It kept him out of trouble. Wow. Got him back from his tours in Europe, getting into trouble. He had lost it and was writing all kinds of crazy stuff. And they also had a son who also had schizophrenia. And
it's genetic then. It's hereditary.
I don't know. Sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not, like I said.
But his father didn't suffer from it.
No.
Okay.
No. But he had a son, and his illegitimate love child also had schizophrenia. So too. But he told his son that he tried to get him involved in computers and told him it was occupational therapy. And I don't think his son was really interested in it. But for John, later on, he says that was my cognitive therapy. So that's what he was really into the Princeton computer lab. He was there every day. And that's where he recovered. That's when he started making friends with people again.
Wow.
Yeah. So
you said he was, when he had lost it, was deep in his illness, he was writing all kinds of crazy shit. Like what? Did you read any of that?
Yeah, he was wanting this world order and so on. And part of his recovery was coming to the realization that politics is ineffectual.
Oh, so he was still focused on this problem in a way.
He wanted a world solution, yeah.
He was trying to save the world.
Thought he was a Prince of Peace. And
Prince of Peace. Wow.
So yeah, they write him up as this is paranoid schizophrenia, but in fact, there might be some truth to that.
Wow, so he was kind of going down the rabbit hole of, is there a political solution to the immortal equilibrium?
And he's also thought he was some ambassador of Antarctica. I mean, there's some crazy stuff going on there, but clearly I'm not saying he wasn't schizophrenic.
Yeah.
He was.
Yes.
And he was just living in a good dream world.
Right.
Just having a good time.
But many of the greatest geniuses of our time have that touch of madness.
Especially mathematicians, yes.
Yeah, mathematicians, even the literary guys. I want to say it was Dostoevsky, right? That he would think he was on the verge of, maybe it was, I think it was him, but I could be wrong. That he was on the verge of like the ultimate epiphany, the realizing it all, and then he would have a seizure. He had these epilepsy, I think he had. So anyways, yeah, people, the great geniuses and great creatives tend to be right there on the boundary of sanity and madness.
And so he walked away from that madness. And I'm just going to paraphrase or just read what he wrote. A key step was a resolution not to concern myself in politics relative to my secret world because it was ineffectual. This in turn led me to renounce anything relative to religious issues or teaching or intending to teach. So he walked away from it to teach, but that doesn't mean his secret world went away. Just because you have a dream that you know is wacky doesn't mean that you don't hold on to those aspirations.
Sure.
So I believe his secret world, as it was revealed when the Pulitzer Committee sent one guy down to Princeton to see if he was still crazy, right? They wanted to know if he was still mentally ill. And he asked him some questions about Nash Equilibrium, and that's when he told him he was really interested in the immortal equilibrium. And that was after his illness.
So then him getting better was just learning to partition that part of his life from his work, right? Well, it sounds like maybe his secret life was blending too much with his real life. And then he learned that, oh, wait, this is an illness. Let me keep this in this bucket over here.
Well, he believes that he was able to recover through his personal will. But others believe that it was more related to his medications and helping.
And his wife, you said, right?
Certainly his wife. Certainly his wife gave him huge support. And Princeton was, the whole campus was more or less a therapeutic environment for him.
Got it.
But I'm not one to take either side. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on this topic.
Yeah.
But certainly in 1983, he recovered. Okay. And after 25 years he was still doing work. He was still refactoring prime numbers. He was doing work on chalkboards in the middle of the night. They called him the Phantom of, I think, East Hall, in Fine Hall, at Princeton. So, and he would do these refactorings down to the nth degree that people look at his work and go, man, today a computer could do that, but that's what he was doing.
Wow.
And he did other stuff like that, and people would race the board and he would like freak out and thought it was so important. When you're schizophrenic, you have these highs, right? It feels good.
Yeah.
And so he was doing some bizarre stuff. Clearly he was mentally ill at that time.
Wow.
Like, this is just awesome. This is Sarnak would look at it. Let me just read the whole thing. It's a little bit long. They talked from time to time. This is a guy named Peter Sarnak, regarding John Nash during his recovery phase. They talked from time to time. After each conversation, Nash would disappear for a few days and then return with a sheaf of computer printouts. Nash was obviously very, very good with the computer. He would think up some miniature problem, usually very ingeniously, and then play with it. If something worked on a small scale, in his head, Sarnak realized, Nash would go to the computer to try to find out if it was also true the next few 100,000 times. So again, just like the white paper, asymptotically ideal money, but he doesn't want it to go to infinite, smaller and smaller grains, snips it. So, this is a guy that was really interested in asymptotically infinite, snipping tails off of infinite tails. And he was, doing C++ and C. Yeah, and this is a direct quote from him in 2009. I was working with computers. It was sort of my big pastime. It was my cognitive therapy in the early days. And then after, 1983 to 2002, that's a long time. We're talking more than 18 years of recovery. And then he publishes Ideal Money. But
it was the first thing he published after recovery.
I'm sure there's other stuff, but I'm not aware of it. Okay. But, the man was truly recovering from 25 years of illness. Yeah. And he was building up his ability to reason again. And that's when Ideal Money came out. And but immediately he switches over from this revolutionary ideal money concept to an evolutionary asymptotically ideal money. And that's what he's always lecturing on.
And what does that mean? What does that switch over for him? You said from revolutionary ideal money.
Well, ideal money, the way he wrote it, is some type of political
again, the
solution.
political one. Okay.
Global world solution.
Right.
But he wrote it, but then very, very quickly realized that that's ineffectual. The politics is ineffectual because there's too many sources out there. Now, these are my words, okay?
Yeah.
There's too many forces and sources out there that don't want it.
Right. So he gamed it out.
It's like he knows it's not going to work. He knows it's going to be ineffectual. It's so important, but he knows it's not going to work. So what does he do? A sly roundabout way. He starts lecturing about asymptotically ideal money and how it impacts savings and kind of all these Hayek ideals and misallocation.
But did he then unpack that one mathematically or technically, or was it he just talked about it?
I think his programming, after he confessed that he was working on the Big Bang, I think his secret world went dark at that point.
So did your thesis would be then that Satoshi Nakamoto became his secret identity in his secret world of building
pseudonym.
This Big Bang that is Bitcoin?
Yeah, and he wasn't in a room like A Beautiful Mind in the movie where he's cutting out papers and figuring out all these weird patterns. You know, that's great visual for movie making, but it distorts what he was really doing. And his secret world, he would go off, just as the man said, he would go off and work on the computer and model these things.
Yeah.
And he was, that was his secret world, was doing the digital transformation of the Nash Equilibrium. And if you look at it, 2002 to 2008, that is, you know, roughly 6 more years of programming to publish the white paper. And of course, discovering what Adam Back does with Hashcash and to convert that over to proof of work and wrap that around the UTXO so that he has digital double spend problem solved and you know, the, let's call it decentralized governance, just to be concise, in a digital way. He solves both of those problems with Hashcash with proof of work.
Has anyone done any handwriting analysis between John Nash and Satoshi Nakamoto?
I'm sure they have. I've noticed, well, for one thing, the plural pronouns is one connection, but also how you spell color. He switches that up, but keep in mind, he was over in Europe, so he's well aware of how, you know, they spell it in England as opposed to how they spell it in the US. And so he was spelling it the English way of doing it. So, I mean, John Nash would have had that knowledge to be able to layer in that, you know, camouflage, more or less.
Gotcha. So there's no other breadcrumbs that connect them from a work output standpoint then?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I get into 2009, you know, the Genesis block, and that gets into the chancellor on brink of second bailout for the banks. And keep in mind that this was not mainstream thinking. Mainstream thinking was Keynesian. Bailouts are okay because these are significantly important banks. Too big to fail. We got to have them. And Nakamoto's clearly running against the grain, and clearly John Nash is in that same camp running against the grain when he's talking about, you know, the politicians being the grand partners. So again, strong connection. And that gets back into our 18 connections.
Wow. What motivated you to, I guess before writing this book, what motivated you to start writing Bitcoin books?
I think Bitcoin is like probably the most important discovery of my life. You know, it challenges a lot of my previous thinking. It clarified, you know, like Zen and these metaphysical concepts that as a 20-year-old were just like, I don't get it. You know, why are people into this? It's just like so nebulous. And, you know, it's just, I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm more into the physical world. And so when you talk about value and quality and consciousness, and these things are tough, but Bitcoin just started to crystallize or clarify these things where it's like, okay, yeah, it makes sense. And it really challenges the idea that, the central planners can fix everything. They can't. Ultimately, it boils down to, what do we value? It's our choice. And if that is not in the equation, then you're really being sold a bill of goods, and more or less being manipulated for someone else's purpose, typically. And
by definition,
that's what Bitcoin represents to me. It was a discovery and then self-discovery.
Well said, well said.
Challenging what I had believed.
Yeah. Well, and then you have to have enough humility to be willing to let go of those prior beliefs, which are often closely bound up to your identity.
Yeah.
Right. So it can give people, I think this is why people hold on to those cherished beliefs so tightly, because it's the integrity of their identity. Oftentimes it can feel a little bit disintegrating to let go of some of these things and admit that you were wrong. But that is the process, that is the death and rebirth of being human and learning and growing.
Well, and not necessarily that you're wrong. It's just, what's the priority? And my priority now, since I've discovered Bitcoin, is fixing our broken monetary system is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I'm a conservationist. I believe in protecting.
I think fixing money fixes that too, to a great extent.
Exactly. So it's a matter of priority. What is the most important thing? Fixing our broken monetary system. By far, that's so yeah, it's a matter of prioritizing. And that's why I think Bitcoin is just the most exciting topic. And that's why I was willing to spend a year writing Apex Environmental Solution. But when I was writing that, that's when I really started to understand John Nash's relationships. And I even wrote in there, I said, basically that this is probably the founder. And then I started to read more about John Nash, and it's like, okay, when I started writing this, the connections just kind of popped out, and it's just such a simple narrative after you study Nash. That's the main takeaway, is this is the most concise, precise, elegant Bitcoin narrative there is. And that is the Nash-Nakamoto connections. It is, I believe, Bitcoin's original intent.
And so you'd say this is like the Occam's razor of who is Satoshi, basically.
Yeah. I mean, if the glove fits, he did the murder, right? We hear that phrase.
Yeah.
It's kind of like South America and Africa fitting together, and North America and Europe fitting together. I mean, after you see so many connections, it's like, okay, that's plate tectonics. It's obvious.
Right.
And I've kind of gotten to that point, and I wouldn't expect anyone to feel that way as I do. But I think after you read the book, you might feel the same way. But it doesn't matter if you believe Nakamoto and Nash are the same people. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What's more important is the narrative. The narrative, I think, is accurate. And that's why I think it's a valuable read.
And so for those, there are many people in Bitcoin that would say it doesn't matter who Satoshi is. Like, this is one of the beautiful things about Satoshi's disappearance, is that he kind of cements the decentralized mythology of Bitcoin by being no discernible, disparageable individual.
Well,
how would you respond to that? Does this matter? Identifying him?
I agree with that. Consider if Nash, let's put it this way: if Nakamoto was still living, and he was sitting on top of more than $1 billion, so yeah, he would be a target. It wouldn't be right to reveal who Nash or Nakamoto really is. But if he's dead, understanding Bitcoin's intent is a valuable resource for understanding Bitcoin. And if fixing our broken monetary system is the most important thing right now, that's ahead of us. It's worthwhile to spend some time to understand if there are connections between Nash and Nakamoto. If they are the same person, that's secondary.
So the intent, we're back to the Prince of Peace thing. That this guy thought he was the Prince of Peace and may actually be the Prince of Peace.
Could over if Bitcoin emerges as an equilibrium, and if you have a equilibrium, you're going to have a standard measurement of value. And if that resolves some of these international relations where non-cooperative relationships can become cooperative by people interested in their self-interest without complicated coalitions, without complicated smart contracts. Yeah, I think Nakamoto will be recognized as a Prince of Peace.
I think that's a beautiful place to leave it. Thank you for writing this, and thank you for coming to join me today.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you very much, Robert.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.